Margaret Chen stood in the long hallway behind the stage. Her heart was beating fast. She could hear the sounds of the crowd on the other side of the wall. There were so many people out there, more people than she had ever seen in one place before. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking a little bit. She tried to steady them by holding them together. Her fingers were old and wrinkled, with spots from age covering the skin. She was 72 years old. Most people her age were at home, watching television or playing with their grandchildren. But not Margaret. She was here, about to walk onto a stage in front of thousands of people. Margaret wore a simple dress with flowers on it. It was blue with white and yellow flowers. Her granddaughter Emily had helped her pick it out from the store 2 weeks ago. Emily had been so excited when Margaret told her about the audition. "Grandma, you have to look perfect," Emily had said, holding up different dresses in the store. Margaret had smiled at her enthusiasm, but she hadn't told Emily everything. She hadn't told her what she was really going to do on that stage. Around Margaret, other people were getting ready for their turns. Most of them were young. There were dancers stretching their legs against the wall. There were singers doing warm-up exercises with their voices. There was a man juggling colorful balls in the corner. Everyone looked so confident, so sure of themselves. Margaret felt out of place, like she didn't belong here. A young woman with bright red hair walked past Margaret. She was wearing tight black clothes and had headphones around her neck. She was maybe 25 years old. Behind her, another young woman followed. This one had blonde hair tied up in a high ponytail. They were talking to each other, but their voices were loud enough for Margaret to hear. "Did you see that old lady over there?" the red-haired woman said, pointing with her thumb back toward Margaret. The blonde woman looked over and laughed. "Oh my God, yes. What is she doing here? Is she lost or something?" They both laughed together. Margaret pretended she didn't hear them. She had heard comments like this before in her life. When you get old, people sometimes think you can't do anything interesting anymore. They think you should just sit quietly and stay out of the way. Margaret reached down and picked up her bag. It was made of brown leather and was very old. Her husband had given it to her 30 years ago. The leather was worn and soft now from years of use. Inside the bag was her equipment, the things she needed for her performance. She held the bag close to her chest. She thought about her husband, Robert. He had died 2 years ago. Cancer had taken him slowly, and Margaret had been by his side until the very end. In those final days, Robert had held her hand and said, "Promise me you'll do it. Promise me you'll show the world what you can do." Margaret had cried and promised him, but after he died, she had been too sad to think about it. For a whole year, she barely left the house. Her children came to visit her and worried about her. They brought her food and tried to make her smile. But Margaret felt empty inside, like a part of her had died with Robert. Then one day her grandson Tommy had come to visit. He was 16 years old and loved music. He had brought his phone and was showing Margaret videos of people performing. "Grandma, look at this," he said, showing her a video of a young man making music with just his mouth and a machine. "This guy is amazing. He's a beatboxer." Margaret had watched the video carefully. She had smiled a little. Tommy had noticed. "You like it, Grandma?" he asked. Margaret had nodded. "Yes, I do," she said quietly. But she didn't tell Tommy that she could do that too. She didn't tell him that she had been doing it for almost 50 years, long before it was popular, long before people called it beatboxing. That night, Margaret had gone down to her basement. It was the first time in months that she had gone down there. The basement was her special place. It was where she kept her equipment, where she practiced, where she made her music. She had turned on the lights and looked around. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust. Her microphones, her loop station, her speakers, all the things Robert had helped her collect over the years. She had walked over to her equipment and touched it gently, wiping away the dust with her hand. Then she had started to practice. At first, her voice was rusty. The sounds didn't come out right, but slowly, after an hour or so, it started to come back to her. The beats, the rhythms, the sounds, it all came flowing back like water from a tap. She had practiced for 3 hours that night, and when she finally went upstairs, she felt more alive than she had in a year. After that night, Margaret had practiced every single day. She practiced in the morning before her children called to check on her. She practiced in the afternoon when her neighbors thought she was taking a nap. She practiced at night when the world was quiet. She practiced until her mouth was tired and her fingers hurt from pressing the pedals. 2 months after she started practicing again, Margaret had seen the advertisement on television. It was for the national talent competition. They were looking for people with special talents from all over the country. The show was famous. Millions of people watched it every week. The winner would get a lot of money and become famous. Margaret had written down the phone number from the television. The next day she had called and signed up for an audition. The person on the phone had asked her age. When Margaret said she was 72, there had been a pause. "And what is your talent, ma'am?" the person had asked. "I do beatboxing and vocal looping," Margaret had answered. There had been another long pause. Then the person had said, "Okay, well, you're registered. Your audition is in 3 months." Margaret hadn't told her children about the audition. She hadn't told her grandchildren either. She wanted it to be a surprise. She wanted to show them on television. She imagined their faces when they saw her. She imagined how proud they would be. Now standing in this hallway, Margaret wondered if she had made a mistake. Everyone here was so young and talented. What if she wasn't good enough? What if people laughed at her? What if she disappointed Robert's memory? A young man with a clipboard walked down the hallway. He was wearing a headset and looked very busy. "Number 47, he called out. "Number 47, you're up in 5 minutes. Margaret looked down at the sticker on her dress. It said 47. That was her number. 5 minutes. She only had 5 minutes left before she had to go out there. Her stomach felt sick. She wanted to run away. She wanted to go back home to her quiet house where no one would judge her. But then she thought about Robert again. She thought about his smile, his encouragement, his belief in her. "You're special, Margaret," he used to say. "The world needs to hear what you can do." Margaret took a deep breath. She closed her eyes and said a little prayer. She prayed for strength. She prayed for courage. She prayed that she wouldn't embarrass herself out there. "Number 47? The young man with the clipboard was standing in front of her now. "Are you number 47? Margaret opened her eyes. "Yes," she said. "That's me." The young man looked at her with surprise in his eyes. He had probably expected someone younger. "Okay," he said slowly. "Follow me. I'll take you to the stage entrance." Margaret picked up her leather bag and followed him. They walked down the hallway and turned a corner. Now she could hear the crowd even louder. She could hear music playing. She could hear someone talking into a microphone, though she couldn't understand the words. They reached a black curtain. Behind the curtain was the stage. The young man turned to Margaret. "When they call your name, you walk through this curtain. Walk to the center of the stage. There's a mark on the floor. Stand on that mark. The judges will ask you some questions. Then you perform." "Got it?" Margaret nodded. Her mouth was dry. She couldn't speak. "Good luck," the young man said. Then he walked away, leaving Margaret standing alone by the curtain. Margaret could see through a small gap in the curtain. She could see the bright lights of the stage. She could see the 3 judges sitting at their big desk. She had seen them on television before. One was a famous pop singer. One was a Broadway director. One was a choreographer. They were all very successful and important people. Beyond the judges, she could see the audience. There were so many people, thousands of them sitting in rows that went up and up and up. They were all waiting to see the next performer, waiting to see her. Margaret heard a voice boom through the speakers. It was the host of the show. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next contestant. She's come all the way from Oregon. She's 72 years old. Please welcome Margaret Chen." The crowd made some noise, but it wasn't very loud. Margaret could tell they weren't very excited. She took one more deep breath, then pushed through the curtain. The lights hit her immediately. They were so bright that she couldn't see anything at first. She had to squint her eyes. Slowly, her eyes adjusted. She could see the judges now. She could see the audience. She could see the cameras pointing at her. Margaret walked slowly to the center of the stage. Her legs felt weak, but she kept walking. She found the mark on the floor and stood on it. She held her leather bag in front of her with both hands. The crowd got quiet. Everyone was looking at her. Margaret felt like she was standing naked in front of all these people. She felt so exposed, so vulnerable. One of the judges, the pop star, leaned forward. She had long dark hair and was wearing a sparkling dress. She smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they think something is cute or funny. "Well, hello there," the pop star said into her microphone. Her voice echoed through the huge auditorium. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Margaret Chen, Margaret said. Her voice sounded small and quiet compared to the judge's voice. Margaret, how old are you? The pop star asked. I'm 72, Margaret answered. Some people in the audience made sounds of surprise. A few people clapped politely. The second judge, the Broadway director, spoke next. He was a man in his 50s with gray hair and glasses. 72, wow. That's wonderful that you're here. And what are you going to do for us today, Margaret? This was the moment. Margaret knew that as soon as she said it, everything would change. People would laugh. They would think she was crazy. But she had come this far. She had to be brave now. I'm going to do a beatboxing and vocal looping performance, Margaret said clearly. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then someone in the audience laughed. Then someone else laughed. Then more people joined in. Soon hundreds of people were laughing. Not mean laughter, but the kind of laughter when people think something is cute or silly. The pop star judge put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide. I'm sorry, she said, trying not to laugh. Did you say beatboxing? Yes, Margaret said calmly. Beatboxing and vocal looping. The third judge, the choreographer, couldn't hide his smile. He was a younger man, maybe 40, with dark skin and a bald head. Ma'am, do you know what beatboxing is? He asked. Yes, I do, Margaret said. I've been doing it for 47 years. This made the audience laugh even harder. Even the judges were laughing now. The pop star was shaking her head in disbelief. 47 years? The Broadway director said. But beatboxing hasn't been around that long. At least not in the mainstream. I know, Margaret said. I started before it was popular. The choreographer leaned back in his chair. He looked at the other judges, then back at Margaret. Look, Mrs. Chen. Ms. Chen, Margaret corrected gently. Ms. Chen, he said. I think there might be some confusion here. This is a professional talent competition. We're looking for world-class performers. Do you understand what that means? Margaret felt something hot rise up inside her. It was anger. She had felt this anger before, many times in her life. The anger of being dismissed, of not being taken seriously, of being judged before she had even tried. I understand perfectly, Margaret said, and her voice was stronger now. I came here to show you what I can do. Are you going to let me do that? Or are you going to judge me before you've even seen my talent? The judges looked surprised. The audience got quieter. Maybe they could hear the strength in her voice. Maybe they could sense that there was more to this old woman than they thought. The pop star judge looked at her fellow judges. They seemed to have a silent conversation with their eyes. Then she turned back to Margaret. Okay, she said. We'll give you 30 seconds. Show us what you've got, 30 seconds. It wasn't much time, but it was enough. Margaret nodded. I'll need to set up my equipment, she said. She walked over to the side of the stage where there was a small table. She opened her leather bag and carefully took out her loop station. It was a small electronic device with buttons and pedals. She also took out her microphone and a small speaker. Her hands were still shaking, but she managed to set everything up. She had done this hundreds of times in her basement. She knew exactly what to do. When everything was ready, Margaret walked back to the center of the stage. She held her microphone in her hand. The loop station was on the floor in front of her, and she could control it with her foot. The judges were watching her with curious expressions now. The laughter had stopped. Everyone wanted to see what this old woman was going to do. Margaret closed her eyes for just a moment. She thought about Robert. She thought about all the hours she had practiced. She thought about all the pain and joy and love that had brought her to this moment. Then she opened her eyes and looked straight at the judges. I'm ready, she said. Margaret stood at the center of the stage with her microphone in her hand. The loop station sat on the floor at her feet. The bright lights made everything look white and hazy. She could barely see the faces in the audience anymore. Maybe that was better. Maybe it was easier this way. She tapped her foot 3 times on the floor. This was her ritual. 3 taps to find her rhythm, 3 taps to center herself, 3 taps before she began. Robert had always smiled when he watched her do this. There she goes, he would say. Getting ready to make magic. The judges sat at their table waiting. The pop star judge had her arms crossed. She was still smiling that smile that said she didn't believe Margaret could do anything impressive. The Broadway director had his pen in his hand, ready to write notes. The choreographer was leaning back in his chair with an expression that said he was already bored. The audience was mostly quiet now, but Margaret could hear whispers. She could hear people talking to each other, probably making jokes about her. That was okay. She had expected this. Old people weren't supposed to do exciting things. Old people weren't supposed to surprise anyone. Margaret took one deep breath and then she began. The first sound that came out of her mouth was deep. It was so deep that it seemed to vibrate through the floor. It was a bass sound, the kind of sound that people feel in their chest more than they hear with their ears. Margaret created this sound by using her throat in a special way, pushing air from deep in her belly. She pressed the button on her loop station with her foot. The machine recorded the bass sound and started playing it back on repeat. Boom, 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 boom. A steady, deep rhythm that filled the entire auditorium. The judge's expressions changed immediately. The pop star sat up straighter in her chair. The Broadway director stopped writing and looked up. The choreographer's mouth opened slightly, but Margaret wasn't done. She had only just started. Over the deep bass, she added a hi-hat sound. This was a light, crispy sound like the cymbal on a drum set. She made it by pushing air between her teeth in short, quick bursts. Tss-tss-tss. She recorded this sound into the loop station too, and now it played along with the bass. The two sounds together created a real beat, a real rhythm that people could move to. Some people in the audience gasped. Margaret heard it, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop now. She was in the zone, that special place where the music took over and everything else disappeared. Next, she added a snare drum sound. This was sharper and louder than the hi-hat. She made it by pushing air out of her mouth while tensing her cheek muscles. It sounded exactly like someone hitting a real snare drum. She placed the snare sounds perfectly between the bass beats, creating a complete drum pattern. The loop station now played all three sounds together, bass, hi-hat, and snare. It sounded like a real drum kit, but it was all coming from Margaret's mouth. The beat was strong and steady, the kind of beat that made people want to nod their heads. The audience wasn't whispering anymore. They were completely silent, watching the 72-year-old woman create music from nothing. The judges looked shocked. The pop star had her hand over her mouth. The Broadway director had dropped his pen. The choreographer was leaning forward now, his eyes wide, but Margaret still wasn't finished. The beat was just the foundation. Now came the melody. She started making sounds that were musical notes. She had learned how to do this by practicing scales every day for years. She could control her voice to make specific pitches like keys on a piano. She created a simple melody, 5 notes that repeated in a pattern. The melody was haunting and beautiful. It reminded people of a choir singing in a church, but it was just one old woman's voice. She recorded this melody into the loop station, and it began to play along with the drums. The music was getting richer now, more complex. It had rhythm and melody together. Some people in the audience started to clap to the beat. They couldn't help themselves. The music was too good. Even people who had been laughing at Margaret a few minutes ago were now moving their heads to the rhythm. Margaret opened her eyes and looked at the judges. She could see the shock on their faces. She could see that they were beginning to understand. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a cute old lady trying to be funny. This was real talent. This was real skill. The pop star judge stood up from her chair. She put both hands on the table and leaned forward, staring at Margaret with disbelief. But Margaret had saved the best for last. Now she was going to show them what she could really do. She started beatboxing in earnest now, creating sounds that seemed impossible for a human mouth to make. She made a sound like a record scratching, the kind of sound DJs make when they move a vinyl record back and forth. She made electronic sounds like a synthesizer. She made a sound like someone playing a trumpet. All of these sounds came from her mouth, her throat, her tongue, her lips. She layered these sounds over the music that was already playing. The combination was incredible. It sounded like a full band was on stage or like someone was playing electronic music through expensive equipment. But it was just Margaret, just her voice, just her equipment that fit in a small leather bag. The audience erupted. People jumped to their feet. They started clapping and cheering and whistling. The sound was so loud that it almost drowned out Margaret's music. But she kept going. She was lost in the performance now. Her eyes closed, her body swaying slightly to the rhythm. She thought about the first time she had discovered she could do this. It was 1978. She was young then, only 31 years old. She and Robert had been trying to have a baby for 5 years with no success. The doctors said there was nothing wrong with either of them. Sometimes they said it just doesn't happen. Keep trying. Then finally, Margaret got pregnant. She and Robert were so happy. They bought baby clothes and painted a room in their house. They picked out names. If it was a girl, they would call her Sarah. If it was a boy, they would call him Daniel. But when Margaret was 8 months pregnant, something went wrong. The baby stopped moving. Margaret went to the hospital and the doctors did tests. They used their machines and listened with their stethoscopes. Then they told Margaret and Robert the news. The baby had died inside her. Their daughter Sarah was gone before she had ever taken a breath. Margaret had to give birth to her dead baby. It was the worst experience of her life. Holding Sarah's tiny, perfect body, knowing she would never open her eyes, never cry, never laugh, Margaret felt like she had died too that day. She felt like her heart had been ripped out of her chest. For months after Sarah's death, Margaret could barely function. She stayed in bed most days. She didn't want to eat. She didn't want to talk to anyone. She felt like she was drowning in dark water and couldn't find the surface. Robert was worried about her. He tried everything to help her. He took her to doctors. He talked to her for hours. He held her when she cried, but nothing seemed to work. Margaret was lost in her grief. Then one day, Robert brought home a tape recorder. It was a simple machine, the kind people used to record their voices. He put it on the table in front of Margaret and said, "Just make sounds. Any sounds. Don't think about it. Just let the sounds come out." Margaret had looked at him like he was crazy, but Robert insisted. "Please," he said. "Just try it." So Margaret had picked up the microphone and made a sound. It was a low, sad sound that came from deep in her throat. It sounded like crying, but it was musical somehow. She made another sound and another. She started making rhythms with her voice, patterns that repeated. It felt good to let these sounds out. It felt like she was releasing some of the pain that was trapped inside her. She recorded herself for an hour that day. Robert sat beside her the whole time, not saying anything, just being there. When Margaret finally stopped, she felt better. Not happy, but better, like a tiny bit of the darkness had lifted. From that day on, Margaret recorded herself every day. She started experimenting with different sounds. She discovered she could make drum sounds with her mouth. She discovered she could make melodies. She started layering sounds on top of each other using the tape recorder. It became her therapy, her way of coping with the unbearable pain of losing Sarah. Over the years, Margaret got better and better at making these sounds. She bought new equipment as technology improved. She learned about looping and beatboxing when those terms were invented, but she had been doing it long before it had names, long before it was cool, long before young people were making millions of dollars doing it on the internet. Robert had always been her biggest fan. He would sit in the basement for hours listening to her practice. "You're amazing," he would tell her. "People need to hear this." But Margaret was shy. She was afraid of being judged, so she kept her talent hidden, sharing it only with Robert. They did have more children eventually. 2 years after Sarah died, Margaret gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Michael. 3 years after that, they had a daughter. They named her Jennifer. Both children grew up hearing strange sounds coming from their mother's basement. They thought it was just Mom being weird. They didn't understand that their mother was working through her grief, creating beauty from pain. Now on this stage, Margaret was finally doing what Robert had always wanted her to do. She was sharing her gift with the world, and from the reaction of the crowd, they loved it. Margaret brought her performance to a close. She created one final sound, a long echoing note that slowly faded away. Then she stopped the loop station with her foot. All the sounds stopped. The auditorium went completely silent for just a moment. Then the crowd exploded. Every single person stood up. They clapped and cheered and screamed. The noise was deafening. People were jumping up and down. Some people were crying. The energy in the room was electric. Margaret opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. She saw thousands of people on their feet applauding for her. Tears started running down her face. She couldn't help it. All the years of keeping this talent hidden, all the fear of being judged, all the pain of losing Sarah, it all came pouring out. She looked at the judges. All 3 of them were standing too. The pop star judge had tears running down her face, just like Margaret. The Broadway director was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. The choreographer was shaking his head in disbelief, a huge smile on his face. The audience kept clapping for what felt like forever. Margaret just stood there, overwhelmed by the response. She had never imagined it would be like this. She had hoped people would like her performance, but this was beyond anything she had dreamed. Finally, the pop star judge raised her hand, asking the audience to quiet down. It took a while, but eventually the crowd settled down enough that the judge could speak. The judge started, but her voice cracked. She paused and wiped her eyes. I don't even know what to say. That was one of the most incredible things I have ever seen in my entire career. When did you? She couldn't finish her sentences. She was too emotional. The Broadway director spoke instead. Ms. Chen, he said, and his voice was thick with emotion too. What you just did was not just impressive. It was revolutionary. I have been in the music business for 30 years. I have seen thousands of performers, and I can honestly say I have never ever seen anything like what you just did. The audience started clapping again at his words. The Broadway director waited for them to quiet down, then continued. I owe you an apology, he said. When you first walked out here, I made assumptions about you. I looked at your age and I thought you couldn't possibly do anything that would impress me. I was wrong. I was very, very wrong. And I'm sorry. The choreographer nodded in agreement. I need to apologize too, he said. I judged you before you even started. That was unfair and unprofessional. What you just demonstrated was world-class skill. The technical ability, the creativity, the emotion you put into that performance, it was all absolutely perfect. Margaret stood there, trying to take it all in. These famous judges, these important people were apologizing to her. They were saying her performance was world-class. It didn't feel real. The pop star judge had composed herself a bit now. She smiled at Margaret, and this time it was a real warm smile. Ms. Chen, can you tell us how you learned to do this? How long have you been practicing? This was the moment Margaret had been both hoping for and dreading. She knew she would have to tell her story. She would have to talk about Sarah, about the pain, about the long years of practicing in secret. It wasn't going to be easy. Margaret took the microphone and held it close to her mouth. Her voice was quiet at first, but it grew stronger as she spoke. I've been doing this for 47 years, she began. Margaret held the microphone close to her mouth. The auditorium was completely quiet. Everyone was waiting to hear what she had to say. She could feel thousands of eyes looking at her. It made her nervous, but she knew she had to tell her story. These people deserved to know the truth behind the music they had just heard. I started doing this in 1978, Margaret said. Her voice echoed through the speakers. I was 31 years old then. My husband Robert and I had been trying to have a baby for many years. We wanted a child so badly. We prayed for it every night. She paused, taking a breath. This part was hard to talk about even after all these years. Finally, I got pregnant. We were so happy. We thought all our prayers had been answered. We picked out a name for our baby. Sarah. We were going to call her Sarah. Some people in the audience made soft sounds of sympathy. They could tell from Margaret's voice that something sad was coming. But when I was 8 months pregnant, Sarah died inside me. Margaret continued. Her voice was steady, but tears were running down her face. I had to give birth to her even though she was already gone. I got to hold her, but only for a little while. Then they took her away and I never saw her again. The pop star judge put her hand over her heart. The Broadway director looked down at his table. The choreographer's eyes were wet with tears. In the audience, many people were crying too. Everyone could feel Margaret's pain even though it had happened so long ago. After Sarah died, I didn't want to live anymore, Margaret said. I stayed in bed for months. I didn't eat much. I didn't talk to anyone. I felt like I was drowning in a dark ocean, and I couldn't find the surface. My husband was so worried about me. He tried everything to help me, but nothing worked. Margaret wiped her eyes with her free hand. She had cried so many tears over Sarah through the years, but talking about it now in front of all these people brought back all the old pain. Then one day Robert brought home a tape recorder. He put it in front of me and said, "Just make sounds. Any sounds. Let them out." I thought he was crazy, but he kept asking me to try it. So finally I picked up the microphone and I made a sound. It was a sad sound, a painful sound, but making that sound helped somehow. It felt like I was letting out some of the pain that was trapped inside me. The audience was completely silent. People were hanging on every word. This wasn't just a story about learning a talent. This was a story about survival, about finding a way to keep living when everything seemed hopeless. I started recording myself every day. Margaret explained. I experimented with different sounds. I found that I could make drum sounds with my mouth. I could make melodies. I could layer sounds on top of each other. It became my therapy. When I was making music, I could forget about the pain for a little while. I could feel like myself again. She smiled a little, remembering those early days. I wasn't very good at first. The sounds were rough and messy, but I practiced every single day, for hours and hours. Robert would sit with me in the basement, listening, encouraging me. He always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. The Broadway director was nodding. He understood what it meant to practice something for hours every day. All great artists did that. All great artists suffered and worked and pushed themselves to get better. As the years went by, I got better. Technology improved too. I bought new equipment. I learned about looping machines. I learned about beatboxing when that became popular. But I had been doing these things for years already, before they had names, before people knew what they were. Margaret looked at the judges, then at the audience. We did have more children later. 2 beautiful children, Michael and Jennifer. They grew up healthy and strong, but I never stopped practicing my music. It was too important to me. It was my way of remembering Sarah, of turning my pain into something beautiful. The pop star judge was crying openly now. She didn't even try to hide it. "Why did you keep it hidden?" she asked. "Why didn't you share this gift with the world sooner?" Margaret thought about that question. It was something she had asked herself many times over the years. "I was afraid," she said honestly. "Afraid of being judged. Afraid that people would think I was silly or crazy. Afraid that people would say I wasn't good enough. So I only performed for Robert. He was my only audience for 47 years. She paused and a sad smile crossed her face. Robert died 2 years ago. Cancer. Before he died, he made me promise that I would finally share my music with the world. He said people needed to hear it. He said it might help someone else who was going through pain just like it helped me." Margaret looked up at the ceiling of the auditorium, as if she could see through it to heaven. "So I'm here because of a promise I made to my husband. I'm here because he believed in me. I'm here because maybe, just maybe, my story can help someone else who is suffering." The audience started clapping again, but it was different from before. It wasn't loud and wild. It was gentle and respectful. People were clapping because they understood now. They understood that Margaret's performance wasn't just about showing off a talent. It was about healing, about courage, about love. The choreographer judge stood up. "Ms. Chen," he said, and his voice was full of respect. "Thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you for your courage, both in performing and in telling us about your pain. What you've been through is unimaginable, and what you've created from that pain is absolutely beautiful." He looked out at the audience, then back at Margaret. "I was wrong to judge you based on your appearance. I was wrong to assume you couldn't do anything impressive just because you're older. You've taught me a valuable lesson today. Talent has no age limit, pain has no age limit, and courage definitely has no age limit." The audience applauded his words. The Broadway director stood up too. "Ms. Chen, I want to echo what my colleague said, but I also want to add something. What you did out here today wasn't just technically impressive. It was emotionally powerful. I could feel the pain in your music. I could feel the love. I could feel the years of practice and dedication. That's what separates a good performer from a great artist. You're not just making sounds. You're telling a story. You're sharing your soul." He picked up a small card from the table in front of him. "I'm giving you my yes vote to move forward in this competition. Actually, I'm not just giving you a yes. I'm giving you the highest recommendation I've ever given any performer on this show." The audience went wild. People jumped to their feet again, cheering and whistling. Margaret felt overwhelmed. She had hoped to maybe impress the judges a little bit. She had hoped to not embarrass herself. But this was beyond anything she had imagined. The pop star judge stood up too. She was still crying, but she was smiling through her tears. "Ms. Chen, I don't know what to say that hasn't already been said, but I want to apologize too. When you first walked out here, I thought you were cute. I thought maybe you would do something sweet and we would all smile and clap politely. I had no idea what you were capable of." She put her hand over her heart. "Your performance moved me in a way that music hasn't moved me in years. And your story broke my heart and put it back together again. You are an inspiration. You are proof that it's never too late to chase your dreams. You are proof that pain can be transformed into beauty." She held up her card. "I'm giving you a yes, and more than that, I'm going to make sure everyone I know watches this performance. The world needs to see this. The world needs to hear your story." The third yes came from the choreographer. He held up his card with a big smile on his face. "Ms. Chen, I'm honored to give you my yes vote. You're going through to the next round, and I have a feeling we're going to be seeing a lot more of you." Margaret stood on the stage holding her microphone, staring at the 3 yes cards. She had done it. She had actually done it. She had walked onto this stage as a scared old woman who everyone had laughed at, and now she was moving forward in the competition with the respect and admiration of the judges and the audience. She thought about Robert. She wished so badly that he could be here to see this moment. He would have been so proud. He would have been standing and cheering louder than anyone. He would have had that huge smile on his face that always made Margaret feel like she could do anything. But in a way, Robert was here. He was in every sound Margaret made. He was in every beat, every rhythm, every note, because he was the one who had saved her all those years ago. He was the one who had brought her that tape recorder and told her to make sounds. He was the one who had believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. "Thank you," Margaret said into the microphone. Her voice was soft but clear. "Thank you so much. This means more to me than you could ever know." The pop star judge came out from behind the judges' table. She walked across the stage to where Margaret was standing. Then she did something unexpected. She hugged Margaret. She wrapped her arms around this old woman she had laughed at just minutes before, and she held her tight. "You're amazing," the judge whispered in Margaret's ear. "Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you're not." Margaret hugged her back, crying happy tears now. The other 2 judges came over too. Soon all 3 judges were standing with Margaret, hugging her, congratulating her, telling her how incredible she was. The audience was on their feet again, clapping and cheering. Some people were whistling. Some people were crying. Everyone was moved by what they had witnessed. This wasn't just a good audition. This was a moment they would remember for the rest of their lives. Finally, the judges went back to their table. Margaret picked up her equipment and put it back in her leather bag. Her hands were still shaking, but now it was from excitement rather than fear. She walked off the stage, through the black curtain, back into the hallway. Backstage, everything was different now. The young contestants who had been laughing at her before were staring at her with their mouths open. The red-haired woman who had made fun of her was standing against the wall with a shocked expression on her face. Her blonde friend looked embarrassed. People started clapping as Margaret walked down the hallway. The other contestants, the crew members, everyone was applauding her. Some people came up to shake her hand. Others asked for her autograph. Margaret felt like she was in a dream. The young man with the clipboard ran up to her. "Miss Chen, that was incredible. I've been working on this show for 5 years and I've never seen anything like that. Can I get a picture with you?" Margaret smiled and agreed. She took pictures with several people. Everyone wanted to talk to her, to tell her how amazing she was, to ask her questions about her music. Finally, Margaret found a quiet corner where she could sit down. Her legs were tired. Her heart was still beating fast. She sat on a chair and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. She heard footsteps approaching. She opened her eyes and saw the red-haired young woman standing in front of her. The one who had laughed at her earlier. The young woman looked nervous. "Miss Chen," she said quietly, "I wanted to apologize. I said some really mean things about you before. I judged you without knowing anything about you. That was wrong, and I'm really sorry." Margaret looked at the young woman. She was probably only 25 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. Margaret didn't want her to feel bad. "It's okay," Margaret said kindly. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is that we learn from them." The young woman nodded, tears in her eyes. "You inspired me today, not just with your talent, but with your courage. I've been too scared to share my real dreams with anyone. I've been playing it safe. But watching you up there, seeing how you faced your fears, it made me realize I need to be braver." Margaret smiled and reached out to pat the young woman's hand. "It's never too late to be brave. And it's never too late to chase your dreams. I'm 72 years old and I'm just getting started. Imagine what you can do with your whole life ahead of you." The young woman thanked her and walked away. Margaret sat there for a while longer, thinking about everything. She had come here today to keep a promise to Robert. But she realized now that it was about more than that. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of more than she thought. It was about showing the world that old people could still do amazing things. It was about inspiring others to face their fears and share their gifts. Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It was a picture of Robert taken a few years before he died. He was smiling in the photo, that big, warm smile she loved so much. She kissed the photograph gently. "I did it, Robert," she whispered. "I finally did it." And somewhere, somehow, Margaret felt like Robert was smiling down at her, proud of his brave, talented wife who had finally let the world see what she could do. 3 days after Margaret's audition, her life changed completely. She had gone home that night feeling happy but tired. She had no idea what was about to happen. She thought maybe a few people would see her performance on television when the show aired in a few months. She thought maybe her family would be proud of her. That was all she expected. But the world had other plans. The television show posted a short video of Margaret's audition on the internet. It was just 2 minutes long, showing the judges laughing at first, then Margaret's incredible performance, then their shocked reactions. The show producers thought maybe a few thousand people would watch it. They were very wrong. Within 24 hours, 10 million people had watched the video. Within 48 hours, it was 50 million. By the end of the third day, over 100 million people around the world had seen Margaret Chen perform. Margaret didn't know any of this at first. She didn't spend much time on the internet. She didn't have accounts on social media. She was just at home living her normal life when her daughter Jennifer called her. "Mom." Jennifer's voice was loud and excited on the phone. "Mom, have you seen the internet? Have you looked online?" "No, honey," Margaret said. She was making herself a cup of tea in her kitchen. "Why? What's on the internet?" "You are, Mom. You're everywhere. Everyone is talking about you. The video of your audition has been watched by millions and millions of people." Margaret almost dropped her teacup. "What? That's not possible. The show hasn't even aired on television yet. They posted a clip online, Mom, and it's gone viral. Completely viral. You're famous." Margaret sat down in her kitchen chair. Famous, her? That seemed impossible. She was just an old woman who liked to make music in her basement. How could she be famous? "Mom, you need to look at your phone," Jennifer said. "Check your messages." Margaret picked up her phone. She had 17 missed calls. She had over 100 text messages. Her email inbox had more than 500 new emails. She scrolled through them with confusion. Messages from people she hadn't talked to in years. Messages from news reporters. Messages from music companies. Messages from people she didn't even know. "Jennifer, I don't understand," Margaret said. "Why are all these people contacting me?" "Because you're inspiring, Mom. Because what you did was amazing. Because people all over the world saw your performance and it touched their hearts. You have to read some of the comments on the video. People are crying. People are saying you changed their lives." After she hung up with Jennifer, Margaret sat at her kitchen table for a long time. She opened her laptop computer, something her grandson had taught her to use a few years ago. She found the video of her audition. The view count was climbing even as she watched. 105 million views. 106 million. It kept going up. She scrolled down to read the comments. There were thousands and thousands of them. This made me cry. I'm 67 and I thought I was too old to pursue my dreams. Not anymore. My grandmother died last year. Watching this woman perform reminded me of her strength and grace. Thank you for this. I've been dealing with depression after losing my son. This woman's story gives me hope that I can find joy again. Age is just a number. Talent is forever. This proved it. I've watched this 10 times and I cry every time. What a beautiful soul. Margaret read comment after comment. She started crying. She had no idea her performance would affect people this way. She had just wanted to keep her promise to Robert. She had just wanted to show the judges what she could do. She never expected to touch the hearts of millions of people around the world. Her phone rang again. It was her son Michael this time. "Mom, CNN wants to interview you, and Good Morning America, and The Tonight Show. They're all calling me because I'm listed as your emergency contact. What should I tell them?" Margaret didn't know what to say. Television interviews? With her? It seemed crazy. Over the next few days, Margaret's phone never stopped ringing. News organizations from around the world wanted to talk to her. Magazines wanted to write articles about her. Music producers wanted to work with her. Companies wanted her to appear in their advertisements. Margaret felt overwhelmed. She was just a regular person. She wasn't prepared for all this attention. She didn't know how to handle it. Jennifer and Michael came to her house to help her. They hired a lawyer to look at all the offers and requests. They hired a manager to help organize everything. Margaret's small, quiet life had suddenly become very complicated, but among all the chaos, some truly special things started to happen. Margaret received a letter from a woman in Japan. The woman was 68 years old. She wrote that she had always wanted to be a ballet dancer, but her parents had told her it was impossible. She had given up on that dream decades ago. But after watching Margaret's performance, she had enrolled in a ballet class. "If you can be brave enough to share your gift at 72, the woman wrote, then I can be brave enough to chase my dream at 68. A man from South Africa sent Margaret a video. He was 75 years old and had been painting in secret for 40 years. His family didn't know about his paintings, but after seeing Margaret, he had shown them his art. In the video, he stood in front of his paintings with tears running down his face, thanking Margaret for giving him the courage to stop hiding. A grandmother from Texas wrote that she had been depressed since her husband died. She hadn't wanted to leave her house, but watching Margaret's story reminded her that life wasn't over yet. She had started volunteering at a local school, teaching children to knit. "You reminded me that I still have something to offer the world," she wrote. These messages touched Margaret's heart deeply. She realized that her performance had done something important. It had shown people that it was never too late to chase their dreams. It had shown people that age was just a number. It had shown people that hidden talents existed everywhere, in everyone waiting to be shared. Margaret decided to accept some of the interview requests. She wanted to spread this message further. She wanted to encourage more people to be brave. Her first major interview was with Good Morning America. They sent a camera crew to her house in Oregon. Margaret was nervous. She had never been on national television before except for her audition. But the interviewer was kind and made her feel comfortable. "Ms. Chen," the interviewer asked, "when you walked onto that stage and people were laughing at you, what were you thinking?" Margaret thought about that moment. "I was scared," she said honestly. "But I was also determined. I had made a promise to my husband, and I knew that even if I failed, even if people kept laughing, at least I would have tried. At least I would have been brave. Your husband, Robert, clearly meant a lot to you," the interviewer said gently. "Do you think he would be proud of what you've accomplished?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I know he would be. Robert always believed in me more than I believed in myself. He always said I had a gift that needed to be shared. I wish he could be here to see this. But in my heart, I feel like he knows. I feel like he's watching somehow." The interview aired the next morning. 20 million people watched it. Margaret received thousands more messages from people who were inspired by her words. But fame came with challenges too. People recognized Margaret when she went to the grocery store. They wanted to take pictures with her. They wanted autographs. Margaret was polite to everyone, but she found it exhausting. She was used to her quiet life. This new attention was difficult to adjust to. Some people also criticized her. On the internet, there were people who said mean things. They said she was too old to be performing. They said she was just looking for attention. They said her music wasn't that good. These comments hurt Margaret's feelings, even though her family told her to ignore them. One night, Margaret sat in her basement with her equipment. She felt tired and confused. Maybe this had all been a mistake. Maybe she should have kept her promise to Robert in a different way. Maybe she should have stayed hidden. But then she remembered all the positive messages. She remembered the woman in Japan who was finally taking ballet classes. She remembered the man in South Africa who had shown his paintings to his family. She remembered the grandmother in Texas who had found a new purpose in life. Margaret realized that the mean comments didn't matter. What mattered was that she had helped people. What mattered was that she had spread a message of hope and courage. What mattered was that she had shown the world that old people were still capable of amazing things. She picked up her microphone and started to practice. The familiar sounds filled her basement. The beats, the rhythms, the melodies. This was who she was. This was her gift, and she wasn't going to let fear or criticism stop her from sharing it. A week later, Margaret received a call from a famous music producer. His name was Marcus, and he had worked with some of the biggest artists in the world. "Ms. Chen," Marcus said on the phone, "I watched your audition and I was blown away. I've never heard anything like it. I would love to work with you. I think we could create something really special together. Margaret was surprised. Work with me? What do you mean? I want to produce an album with you. We could combine your unique sound with different musical styles. Gospel, hip-hop, electronic, classical. We could create something that's never been done before. Margaret thought about it. An album at her age? It seemed crazy. But then again, everything that had happened in the past few weeks seemed crazy. I don't know, Margaret said slowly. I've never recorded professionally before. I'm not sure I know how. That's what I'm here for, Marcus said kindly. I'll guide you through the whole process. We'll take our time. There's no pressure. I just think your talent deserves to be heard properly, with professional production. What do you say? Margaret thought about Robert. She thought about all the years they had spent in their basement, him listening to her practice, him encouraging her to share her gift. She thought about the promise she had made to him. Okay, Margaret said. Let's do it. Over the next 3 months, Margaret worked with Marcus on her album. They met in a professional recording studio in Los Angeles. Margaret had never been in such a place before. There were so many buttons and switches and computers. It was intimidating at first, but Marcus was patient with her. He explained everything. He showed her how to use the professional equipment. He helped her record her sounds in the highest quality possible. They experimented with different styles. Margaret beatboxed over gospel choirs. She created rhythms that mixed with electronic music. She recorded vocal loops that were combined with classical orchestras. The results were amazing. It was music that sounded like nothing else in the world. Margaret's children came to visit her in Los Angeles. They sat in the recording studio and watched their mother work. They had known she practiced music in the basement, but they had never really understood how talented she was. Now watching her work with professional musicians and producers, they were amazed. Mom, Michael said during a break, I'm sorry we never asked you more about your music. I'm sorry we just thought it was a hobby. I had no idea you were this good. Margaret hugged her son. It's okay. I never showed you. I kept it hidden. But that's changing now. Jennifer was crying happy tears. Dad would be so proud of you, Mom. He always knew you were special. During the recording process, Margaret also mentored some younger artists. Marcus had invited several young musicians to the studio to learn from Margaret. They watched her create beats with her mouth. They learned her techniques. They asked her questions about her process. One young man, a 22-year-old beatboxer named Devin, was especially interested. He was already quite good himself with millions of followers on social media. But he told Margaret that watching her perform had taught him something important. It's not just about the technical skills, Devin said. It's about the emotion behind the music. It's about having something real to say. You taught me that. Your performance wasn't just impressive. It was meaningful. That's what I want my music to be. Margaret smiled at him. The best art comes from truth. From real emotions and real experiences. Don't just copy what other people are doing. Find your own voice. Tell your own story. Devin took her advice to heart. He later released a song dedicated to his grandmother, incorporating some of the techniques Margaret had shown him. The song became very popular, and Devin credited Margaret with inspiring him to dig deeper in his art. As the album was being completed, Margaret thought about how much her life had changed. 3 months ago, she had been a quiet widow living alone in Oregon. Now she was recording an album in Los Angeles, being interviewed by major media outlets and inspiring people all around the world. It was overwhelming sometimes, but it was also wonderful. She felt more alive than she had in years. She felt like she had a purpose again. She felt like Robert's belief in her had been justified. The album was titled Never Too Late. It was Margaret's message to the world. The cover showed a photograph of Margaret in her basement, surrounded by her equipment with a peaceful smile on her face. When the album was released, it exceeded everyone's expectations. It reached number 3 on the music charts. People bought it not just because Margaret was famous, but because the music was genuinely good. Critics praised it as innovative and emotional. Radio stations played it. Streaming services featured it on their front pages. Margaret donated all the money from the album sales to charities. She gave to organizations that helped people dealing with grief and depression. She gave to music education programs in schools. She gave to hospices that cared for dying patients. She wanted to use her success to help others, just like Robert would have wanted. 6 months after Margaret's audition first aired on television, she stood backstage at the same auditorium where her journey had begun. She was preparing for a special performance. The television show had invited her back for their anniversary special. But this time, she wouldn't be performing alone. Margaret looked at the 12 people standing with her backstage. She had met all of them over the past few months. Each one had a story similar to hers. Each one had hidden their talent for years because they thought they were too old, too unusual or too different. There was Gerald, a 79-year-old man who could rap better than most professional hip-hop artists. He had worked as an accountant his whole life and wrote rap lyrics in secret during his lunch breaks. After seeing Margaret's performance, he had finally shared his talent with his family. They had been shocked and amazed. There was Patricia, a 68-year-old woman who could sing opera but also loved heavy metal music. She combined the two styles in a way that was powerful and unique. For 40 years, she had only sung in her car when she was alone, but after watching Margaret, she had recorded a video of herself and posted it online. It had gone viral too. There was Chen, an 82-year-old man who could breakdance. He had learned as a young man but stopped when people told him it was undignified for someone his age. After seeing Margaret's courage, he had started dancing again. His knees hurt and his back was stiff, but he didn't care. He was doing what he loved. Margaret had reached out to all of them personally. She had watched their videos online and been moved by their courage. She had called them and invited them to perform with her on this special show. They had all said yes immediately. Now they stood together backstage, a group of older adults who refused to let age define what they could do. They were nervous but excited. The audience didn't know they were going to perform together. It was going to be a surprise. The young man with the clipboard approached them. He was the same one who had been there 6 months ago when Margaret first auditioned. He smiled at Margaret warmly. He treated her with respect now. "You're on in 5 minutes, Ms. Chen," he said. "Is everyone ready?" Margaret looked at her fellow performers. They all nodded. They were ready. The host of the show walked onto the stage and the crowd cheered. Margaret could hear him through the curtain. "Ladies and gentlemen, 6 months ago a woman walked onto this stage and changed everything. She was 72 years old. The judges laughed at her. The audience didn't take her seriously. But then she performed and she blew everyone away. Her audition video has now been watched over 300 million times worldwide. She has inspired countless people to chase their dreams no matter their age. Please welcome back to our stage the incredible Margaret Chen." The crowd erupted. The cheers were so loud that Margaret could feel them vibrating through the floor. She took a deep breath and walked through the curtain. The lights were just as bright as she remembered. But this time Margaret wasn't scared. She walked confidently to the center of the stage. She was wearing a beautiful dress that Jennifer had helped her pick out. It was silver and sparkled under the lights. The crowd was on their feet, clapping and cheering for her. Margaret smiled and waved. She saw the 3 judges at their table. They were all standing too, applauding. The pop star judge had tears in her eyes already. When the noise finally died down, Margaret spoke into the microphone that was handed to her. "Thank you so much," she said. "Thank you for the incredible support you've given me over the past 6 months. Your messages, your stories, your courage, they have all inspired me just as much as I apparently inspired you." The crowd cheered again. Margaret waited for them to quiet down. "When I first walked onto this stage 6 months ago, I was terrified. I was an old woman with a hidden talent, keeping a promise to my late husband. I never expected what would happen. I never expected to touch so many hearts around the world." She paused, looking out at the thousands of faces watching her. But something wonderful happened after my audition aired. People started reaching out to me. Old people, young people, people from every corner of the world. They told me about their hidden talents. They told me about the dreams they had given up on. They told me that watching me gave them courage to try again. Margaret gestured toward the side of the stage. "Tonight I'm not performing alone. I've invited some very special people to join me. They are all over 65 years old. They all had hidden talents that they kept secret for years. But they found their courage just like I did. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my friends to the stage." One by one, the 12 performers walked out onto the stage. Gerald the rapper, Patricia the opera metal singer, Chen the breakdancer, and 9 others. Each one was older. Each one had gray hair or wrinkles. Each one had a story of courage. The crowd went wild. People jumped to their feet again, cheering and clapping. This was unexpected. This was amazing. This was exactly the kind of thing that made the show special. Margaret waited for the noise to calm down. then continued speaking. Each of these incredible people has agreed to share their gift with you tonight. We're going to create something together, something that represents all of us, something that shows the world that talent, passion, and dreams have no expiration date. The performers took their positions on the stage. Margaret walked to her equipment and set it up. The others had their own instruments and microphones. The stage was crowded but organized. They had rehearsed this performance many times over the past 2 weeks. Margaret looked at her fellow performers and nodded. They were ready. She began with her signature bass drop, that deep sound that vibrated through everyone's chest. She recorded it into her loop station and it began to repeat. Then she added her hi-hat sounds and snare drums, building the beat just like she had done in her audition. But then something new happened. Gerald the rapper stepped forward. Over Margaret's beat, he started rapping. His voice was strong and clear. His words talked about life, about aging, about refusing to give up on dreams. The rhythm of his words matched perfectly with Margaret's beats. The audience was already amazed. But there was more. Patricia came in next, her powerful opera voice soaring over the hip-hop beat. It shouldn't have worked. Opera and hip-hop were completely different styles. But somehow it was beautiful. Her voice added a layer of emotion and power that made the hair on everyone's arm stand up. Then Patricia switched to her metal voice, growling and powerful, and the crowd went crazy. They had never heard anything like this combination of sounds. Chen the breakdancer started moving. Despite his 82 years, he spun on the floor. He did moves that people half his age couldn't do. His body was old, but his spirit was young. The crowd cheered him on. One by one, the other performers added their talents to the mix. There was a 70-year-old woman who played the electric violin like a rock star. There was a 67-year-old man who did magic tricks while dancing. There was a 75-year-old woman who created beautiful paintings on a canvas in real time, her brushstrokes matching the rhythm of the music. All of these different talents, all of these different people coming together to create something unique and powerful. It was chaos and beauty at the same time. It was proof that creativity had no limits. Margaret continued her beatboxing throughout, providing the foundation that held everything together. She added new sounds, new rhythms, new melodies. She was in her element, doing what she loved, surrounded by people who understood her. The performance lasted 8 minutes. When it finally ended with one last powerful beat from Margaret, the entire auditorium erupted. Every single person was on their feet. People were crying, cheering, screaming. The judges were standing on their chairs applauding wildly. It was the most powerful moment the show had ever had. The performers all held hands and took a bow together. Margaret looked at each of them and saw tears of joy on their faces. They had done it. They had shown the world what they could do. The host ran onto the stage, his own eyes wet with tears. "That was incredible," he shouted into his microphone. "That was absolutely incredible." He turned to the judges. "Judges, what did you think?" The pop star judge was crying so hard she could barely speak. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen on this stage. Not just because of the talent, which was amazing, but because of what it represents. It represents courage. It represents refusing to give up. It represents the truth that we are never too old to share our gifts with the world." The Broadway director nodded, wiping his own eyes. "I agree completely. This performance will go down in history. It will be remembered as the moment when this show truly changed lives." "Thank you, Margaret. Thank you to all of you." The choreographer stood up and spoke directly to the performers. "You have all taught us something important tonight. You've taught us to never judge people by their appearance. You've taught us that passion and talent can exist at any age. You've taught us to be brave. Thank you for that gift." The audience cheered again. The performers hugged each other, overwhelmed by the response. Over the following weeks, the video of this group performance spread even faster than Margaret's original audition. Within a month, it had been watched over 500 million times. News organizations around the world covered it. It was shown in schools to teach children about courage and persistence. It was shown in nursing homes to inspire elderly residents. The impact was enormous. Thousands of older adults started sharing their hidden talents online. A movement began with the hashtag #NeverTooLate. People posted videos of their 70-year-old mothers painting, their 80-year-old fathers playing guitar, their 65-year-old aunts doing stand-up comedy. The stereotype that old people couldn't do anything interesting began to crumble. Companies started featuring older adults in their advertisements. Television shows started including older contestants. The world was slowly beginning to understand that age was just a number. Margaret received thousands of letters every week. She tried to read as many as she could. Each one touched her heart. Each one reminded her why she had found the courage to walk onto that stage in the first place. One letter particularly moved her. It was from a teenage girl named Sarah. The girl wrote that her grandmother had died recently, and it had made her very sad. But watching Margaret's performances had reminded her of her grandmother's strength and courage. The girl had decided to write a song about her grandmother and perform it at her school. She thanked Margaret for inspiring her. Margaret cried when she read that letter. A girl named Sarah, just like her lost daughter. It felt like a sign from Robert, like he was telling her that she was doing the right thing. The judges who had initially mocked Margaret became some of her biggest advocates. The pop star judge started a program called Second Chances that provided resources and opportunities for older adults who wanted to pursue creative careers. The Broadway director created a special scholarship fund for older students who wanted to study performing arts. The choreographer started teaching classes specifically for seniors who wanted to learn dance. They all publicly acknowledged their initial bias and used their platforms to fight against ageism in the entertainment industry. They became allies in the movement that Margaret had unintentionally started. Margaret continued to perform, but she was selective about where and when. She preferred smaller venues where she could interact with the audience. She performed at nursing homes, bringing joy to residents who felt forgotten. She performed at schools, teaching children that their grandparents were still vibrant and capable. She performed at community centers, encouraging local talent to emerge from the shadows. She didn't want to become a pop star. She didn't want fame for fame's sake. She wanted to use her platform to spread a message and to help others. That was what mattered to her. 1 year after her original audition, Margaret stood in front of her bathroom mirror in her house in Oregon. She looked at her reflection. She saw an old woman with wrinkles and gray hair, but she also saw something else. She saw strength. She saw courage. She saw someone who had refused to let fear win. She went down to her basement, where everything had started all those years ago. The room looked the same, but it felt different now. It wasn't a hiding place anymore. It was a training ground. It was where she prepared to share her gift with the world. She sat down at her equipment and put on her headphones. She started to practice, creating new sounds and new rhythms. Even though she had already achieved so much, she still practiced every day. She still pushed herself to get better. She still loved the music as much as she had when Robert first gave her that tape recorder in 1978. As she practiced, she thought about her journey. She thought about Sarah, the daughter she had lost. She thought about how that pain had led her to music. She thought about Robert, who had saved her life by encouraging her to express herself. She thought about her children and grandchildren, who were so proud of her now. She thought about all the people around the world who had told her that she inspired them. Margaret realized that everything in her life had led to this moment. All the pain, all the practice, all the fear, all the courage. It had all been preparing her to share her gift at exactly the right time. She stopped practicing and sat quietly for a moment. She felt Robert's presence in the room, like he was sitting beside her just like he used to do. She smiled. "Thank you," she whispered to him. "Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for giving me that tape recorder all those years ago. Thank you for making me promise to share my gift. You were right. The world did need to hear it." She felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had kept her promise. She had honored Robert's memory. She had helped people. She had shown the world that it was never too late to chase your dreams. Margaret picked up her microphone and started practicing again. The sounds filled her basement just like they had for 47 years. But now those sounds didn't stay in the basement. Now they went out into the world. Now they made a difference. And that, Margaret thought as she created her music, was the greatest gift of all. Not the fame, not the recognition, not the success. The greatest gift was knowing that she had used her talent to help others, that she had turned her pain into beauty, that she had proven it was never ever too late to share your gift with the world. Margaret kept making music, and the world kept listening, and lives kept changing, one beat at a time.